If you think the French Revolution and its contemporary movements were the first of their kind, think again. In ancient Rome, slaves found the courage to stand up against their overlords, the Roman Republic, to win their freedom. These wars, known as the Servile Wars, would span several decades and hundreds of miles. Before diving into the historical tales, though, we have to be aware of the impact of the storytellers. There is no first-hand record of any of the Servile Wars. One of the primary sources available for the Servile Wars is the Ab Urbe Condita Libre, or History of Rome by Livy, written between 27 BCE and 9 BCE. Another widely used source is the Bibliotheca Historica, or Historical Library, by Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian, sometime in the 1st century BCE. The last of the most commonly studied sources is the Greek biographer Plutarch's Parallel Lives, compiled in the 2nd century. Though the Servile Wars left their mark on the people of that time, the 3 slave revolts made an impression on historians, past and present. Even though the history books may not be wholly accurate, these uprisings caused the wheels of change to begin turning in the mighty Roman Republic and the future Roman Empire. Pressure had been building for decades on the little island of Sicily. Rebellions like those that made up the first 2 Servile Wars were not just born, they were cultivated. The native Sicilians, who consisted of multiple small tribes, had been trading with the mighty Phoenician Empire for quite some time. Not needing to go much further inland than the coast, the Phoenicians left most of the island open for other nations to settle. In 750 BCE, the first of these other nations would land when Greek ships sailed into the harbors on the island's western side. For centuries, this island division seemed to work just fine, but eventually the Phoenician posts were enveloped in the Carthaginian hegemony. As the Greeks continued expanding throughout the Mediterranean, the Mageddon dynasty stepped up to stop that expansion. 2 Greek factions had settled on the island of Sicily, the Ionians and the Dorians. The Ionians maintained a good relationship with the Sicilians and the Phoenicians. However, the Dorians were not nearly as friendly and wanted nothing more than to expand their territory, even if it meant taking land from the Phoenicians and the native Sicilians. By 540 BCE, the Carthaginians had worked their way into control of Sicily. But things began to change after an excommunicated Spartan prince, Dorius, arrived in Sicily. The Carthaginians killed him, which prompted the power-hungry Greeks to retaliate. The Dorian Greeks had been overtaking the Ionians through deportation, enslavement, and ethnic cleansing, which led the Ionians into a desperate alliance with the Carthaginians, giving rise to the First Sicilian War. After several conflicts, a delicate balance of power allowed peace to reign in the region. In 416 BCE, the harmony between the Dorian Greeks and the Ionian Greeks was shattered when the cities of Selinus and Segesta reignited their feud. Diplomacy would be intermixed with battles, and eventually the Carthaginians would gain control over Sicily and begin the height of their reign. Over the next 3 centuries, there would be several more Sicilian wars until Rome finally got involved seriously, causing the First Punic War. Rome and Carthage would struggle to control the island, with the Carthaginians and Romans ending up at the negotiating table. Rome would annex Sicily, and because Carthage was the defeated party, it would also have to pay reparations. In 215 BCE, a rivalry was sparked by Hannibal's push into Roman territories, one of which was Sicily. For several years, conflicts would rage until the plague and the Roman forces toppled the Carthaginian troops. Having taken a hit from all sides, the Carthaginians packed up and went home, leaving the island to the Romans. This rapid departure changed many things on the island, and the biggest was the idea of owning land. The local Sicilians, who were Greek or Roman supporters, and the Sicilians and Greeks from the mainland swallowed up all the land. The new landowners had a different mentality when it came to the slave population on the island. With the majority being there as part of the reparations or from other places like Macedonia, the elite had little empathy or sympathy for the slaves. The new landowners' attitudes led to many of them treating their slaves much worse than their predecessors. It is vital to contextualize slavery in the Roman Republic to understand the Servile Wars. As the Roman Republic expanded and more principalities and countries fell to them, many conquered populations became slaves. As the Republic expanded and wars were won, many of the fallen enemies of the Republic were taken captive and eventually sold into slavery. Those of lower social standing with no skills were also targeted. These slaves were taken to different parts of the country, or even sent abroad on slave vessels to be sold in other markets. The influx of slaves from these regions and other means had a massive impact on the economy, as they left the economy dependent on slavery. Possibly up to 20% of the Roman population consisted of slaves. No matter what large city one went to in the Roman Republic, there was no doubt one would find a large slave market where men, women, and children were bought and sold like cattle. Many ports along the Mediterranean were more known for their slave markets than actual markets. Many slaves came to the shores of Italy through these markets, where the Roman elites purchased them. Because of the expansion of the Roman Republic, those of noble status or who had immense lands found the need for more laborers. After a while, it was clear that the influx of slaves from the Roman conquest and the plethora of other sources could benefit the government. This revelation led to an eventual sales tax being placed on slaves. It originally started at 2% under the rule of Augustus, and eventually, by 43 CE, it worked its way up to 4%. The top 5 divisions of jobs that slaves were required to do were domestic, public, urban works and services, farming, and mining. For those who were brought into a Roman elite's or noble's home, their living spaces were often much more comfortable and elaborate than those who lived in a tradesman's home. On the other hand, those chosen to work in the mines and quarries lived out their days doing strenuous manual labor and living in hovels. Another form of employment open to slaves was that of servus publicus. These slaves were not privately owned, but rather owned by the public. Most of them wound up doing work in temples and colleges. Like those who found their way into gladiator schools, these slaves lived bizarre lives. Many of these slaves would gain some education, which would give them a healthy advantage in possibly obtaining their freedom. The intensive labor that the slaves of the Roman Republic endured was backbreaking and exhausting, but some slaves could claim freedom. After manumission, the act of a slave working off his debt, these men and women would work their way into becoming a citizen of the Republic. Manumission allowed slaves the opportunity to own property and participate in government, as long as they were born male. These formerly enslaved people fell into the social class known as the libertini. The process of manumission was challenging and very rare, but there are documents and stories about slaves who were able to do this. However, for the majority of slaves, this was not an option. Roman masters saw their slaves as nothing more than property, leaving them with the ability to treat their slaves as they saw fit. This atmosphere and the treatment of the slaves would lead to 2 slaves marshaling their comrades together and rising against the Sicilian Roman enslavers in 135 BCE. As Eunice, the self-proclaimed prophet from Syria, was rallying the underprivileged, Cleon, a Sicilian slave, launched an attack on Enna, a city in Sicily. Cleon's eventual union with Eunice sparked slave revolutions across Italy and the Aegean Sea. The enslaved people repelled the Romans until 132 BCE, when the Romans finally razed the slave-controlled cities of Enna and Tauromenium, concluding the First Servile War. 23 years passed, and in that time, the Roman Republic became a mighty power in the Mediterranean. During the 2nd century BCE, they were fighting the Cimbri and Teutones in the north. The Romans began rebuilding their army as the Germanic tribes kept raiding and pillaging the Iberian Peninsula. Word was sent to several Roman territories to send men, but the task turned out to be far more complicated than anticipated. Licinius Nerva, the praetor of Sicily, had the same problem as other Roman leaders. There were no men he could send since most of the able-bodied men were forced into slavery due to the harsh taxes. Nerva proclaimed that able-bodied men who felt they had been wrongly enslaved due to taxes could earn their freedom. After several days of hearings, more than 800 men had proven that they deserved liberation from their masters. In response, many prominent Romans on the island coerced the praetor to reverse his decree and return their slaves to them. A wave of disappointment took over slaves, and they began to kill their masters. The movement kept gaining momentum as more slaves defied the Roman norms and formed militias. After a few victories against Roman troops, the slaves gathered and chose Salvius Tryphon as their leader. Like Eunice, the great leader of the slave uprising who had become King Antiochus of Sicily, Salvius had once been a reputed seer. After Salvius took over the city of Morgantia and amassed an army of more than 20,000 slaves, Athenion, a Sicilian, joined him with his army. The Romans nullified their impressive victories in the next couple of years by quelling the uprising in 100 BCE, concluding the Second Servile War. It was not long, however, that another revolt would shake the Romans. This conflict, known as the Third Servile War, did not occur in Sicily, but in mainland Italy. Much like other slaves, many men within the gladiator schools of Rome dreamed of freedom. In 73 BCE, while the mighty Colosseum was still being built, 200 gladiators in Capua escaped confinement. Among these, a Thracian man named Spartacus would become the icon of this revolt. Taking advantage of their good luck, these men seized the wagons and quickly got out of the city, moving to a more strategic location where they could defend themselves. These men would not only lead the slaves over the next 2 years, but would also grow this small band of slaves into a mighty army of more than 120,000 men. These forces would defeat Roman leader after leader and leave history with unforgettable horror scenes. But the Romans were known for their military might, and with time, they beat the legions of slaves. Most rebels were killed in the conflict, and the survivors suffered a similar fate. The generals used the war to propel their political careers, transforming the Roman Republic into the mighty Roman Empire. Though every one of the Servile Wars undoubtedly played a part in changing the Roman Republic, the third one may have had the most impact. Without the First and Second Servile Wars, though, there is no telling if the slaves of that gladiator school would have had the courage to stand up and fight. The authors of the Enlightenment looked up to the authors of ancient Greek and Rome. The writings of Livy and the tales of the Servile Wars would have given them hope to challenge the status quo. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Servile Wars, check out our book, The Servile Wars, a captivating guide to the 3 slave revolts against the Roman Republic. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.